And we're going to continue with the 12th chapter of the Mystery of the Cupboard, which is called Jenny. Jenny is the small figure that was a maid in the 1870s when Boone was a kid, Omri thinks, and she had a terrible life as a servant. She was almost a slave, and when she stayed with Miss Jessie, as she called Jessica Charlotte, her body would just stop moving in the 1870s, and so she was sent away to a hospital where she woke up one morning. As she lay there, apparently unconscious, eating nothing, hardly breathing, she had put on weight, and when she awoke, she was in better health than when she had fallen ill. They sent her home to the family she worked for, but they were growing tired of her turns. The mistress of the house summoned her for the last time. "You'll have to go," she said carelessly. "You're not earning your keep. I'll give you your wages at the end of this week, but you can't expect character after the trouble you've caused." To be turned out without a character was the worst thing that could happen to a servant in those days. It meant she had no reference, and without one, no one would employ her. Jenny left the house in which she had worked herself to the bone with nothing but her few possessions in a little cardboard suitcase. Sleeping rough that night in a field, cold, friendless, and frightened, she was summoned, and that was when she told Miss Jessie very firmly through her tears of relief that she wanted to stay with her forever and not go back ever to the cruelty of her life in 19th century Dorchester. "And she were happy," said Tom in the end. He still wiped his eyes from time to time, but it was obvious to Omri that talking about Jenny had done him good. "She were happy with the lady, and she were happy with me. It was hard to keep her safe and secret. Any number of times we were nearly caught out, but I worked out ways." "Didn't your wife—" "Left me early on. Took Peggy and left me for another man. Dead now, these 20 years. Peggy come to take care of me after Jen went. I had a bit of a breakdown. Can't manage like I used to. Forget things. So she come. Good girl is Peggy." "So you lived alone all those years?" "Like Mrs. Driscoll predicted. Alone, yet not alone. I had Jen. I fixed her up a little place of her own and all manner of things for her to use, and she lived her little life alongside my big un, and we was happy. She loved to read. She used to read to me from them little books she'd brought. The Brontes and Walter Scott and the poets, Wordsworth and them. She loved poetry. Voice like silver bells she had." He blew his nose for the 10th time. "She was a wonder, all right. I've been lucky." "But how did she, die?" asked Omri. A dark look came over Tom's face. "She didn't die. She were killed," he said. "Killed?" "That's my belief. Or let to die, same thing." "What happened?" "Listen. She was sitting on my hand the way she always did when we was having a chat, just sitting in her long dress, doing her embroidery, talking to me of an evening as usual, and on a sudden she just lifted her head, looked at me surprised like, and stopped." "Stopped? You mean—" "I mean she stopped. She stopped being Jenny. She stopped being human." Omri looked at him incredulously. "Stopped being human?" He nodded fiercely. "I still can't believe it, not properly, but it happened. One second it was her, the next second she went light." "What?" "Light in my hand. She didn't weigh hardly anything. And then it fell over sideways, no proper colour, nothing. I touched it. You won't laugh. It was just a woman shape, only it was—" He buried his face abruptly in his hands. "Plastic," breathed Omri. Tom lifted his face. "You know," he said. "You know all about it." "Yes," said Omri, "I know." They sat for a while. Tom recovered a little and lit another cigarette. "What did you mean, killed?" Omri asked at last. "Them where she came from, at the other end, as she called it, where she'd left the rest of her, the way I figure it, all them years she was in the paupers' hospital ward, just layin' there like asleep. Well, the real Jenny were here with me, and then one day, about 30 years of it, well, you work it out, it was around 1999, time of the Second Boer War, and they must have been desperate for beds and didn't have enough staff. And maybe they just decided it weren't worth keeping her alive because she was never going to wake up. And that was true. They wasn't to know she was alive and kicking and making me happy 3/4 of a century in the future. Omri said, "Have you still got her, the plastic figure of her?" Tom shook his head. "You ain't laughed so far, so I'll tell you what I done. I give her a Christian burial in the churchyard, made her a little coffin, read the burial service over her, put her a cross with her name on it this big." He held up his finger and thumb. "Course it'll all get overgrown in time when I'm gone, but I done what I thought was right." Omri, remembering other funerals, nodded. "Course," said Tom after a while. "I worried about her. When she were with me, worried she'd be lonely and that for people her own size, but she said not to. She were content with me. She said them others weren't much company, not her sort, she said." "What others?" Omri asked sharply. "The others the lady had." Of course. Jessica Charlotte had brought a number of little people to life. She'd hinted as much in the account. All gone safely back, Tom had said, before she died. "Do you know anything about the others?" He shook his head. "Jenny said they weren't her sort, so I didn't bother my head about 'em. The cupboard and the key that brought 'em, they were gone. I'd posted 'em off like Mrs. Driscoll told me. But there was a number of 'em, I know that, 3 or 4. They must be in the cash box," Omri suddenly said. "They're plastic figures." "Oh, said Tom. "That's where they are, I reckon." Peggy appeared at the back door. "Run along now, young man," she said. "Dad's tired now. It's time he was coming in for his tea." "It's time I got to work mending that roof tile," said Tom, levering himself to his feet. "You ain't mending no roofs at your age, Dad. Don't you be so foolish. Come along now, it's getting chilly." Aubrey gave Tom a secret smile, and left them still arguing. When he got back to the Red Lion, it was closed and the garden was empty. He wasn't surprised. It was well after 4 o'clock. No wonder they hadn't waited. He walked home between the hedges, his mind full to bursting. Nobody was annoyed with him for going off by himself, except Tony's dad. He seemed quite annoyed for some reason. "Patrick told us you went off with that old Thatcher," he said aggrievedly. "Said you were having a long talk with him." "Yes," said Omri. "What did you find to talk to him about for so long?" he asked, in a tone that implied that nobody but himself had any rights to Tom at all. "He was interesting," said Omri vaguely. "I'll bet. You might have taken me along. You know I wanted to interview him, and now we've got to get home." "Sorry," said Omri, but he wasn't, not specially. Tom wasn't crazy, but you never knew. If a real journalist got to work on him, he might have let something slip. That night, when they were in bed, Omri told Patrick everything, including his great decision. Apart altogether from the earrings, if they ever wanted to hear the end of the story, to know who the rest of Jessica Charlotte's companions had been, the very first little people ever to travel through time in the magic cupboard, they were going to have to recover the key from the bank to open the cash box. And that is the end of Chapter 12.